The air in the room was worth more than most countries' GDP. It circulated through the private dining hall of Ethelred's, New York's most exclusive Hellenic restaurant, carrying the scent of roasted lamb, Cretan olive oil, and ambition so thick you could taste it. 42 of the world's foremost experts in archaeology, classics, and maritime history sat around a colossal mahogany table. They were titans from Princeton, Cambridge, and the Sorbonne. Museum curators who controlled empires of antiquity, and corporate raiders who saw history not as a lesson, but as an asset class. They were all there for one man, Konstantin Drakos. A shipping magnate of mythical wealth, Drakos was a ghost who hadn't been photographed in 20 years. He was the last of the old world titans, a man whose decisions could shift global trade routes. Tonight, he had summoned the best minds on Earth to solve a puzzle that had haunted his family for a century. One by one, under the weight of his silent, obsidian gaze, they had all failed. The deal, a partnership rumored to unlock a multi-billion-dollar technological revolution, was dissolving into the expensive silence. But then, a voice, soft as sea-worn glass, broke the spell. It didn't come from a tenured professor or a pinstriped consultant. It came from the shadows near the service station, from a young woman balancing a tray of empty ouzo glasses. They had seen her only as a function, a pair of hands to clear their plates. They were about to discover she was the only one in the room who understood the sea. This is the story of how a waitress navigated the treacherous waters of the elite and reclaimed a lost legacy. Elena Petrova believed in the physics of invisibility. The first rule of service at Ethelred's was to exist only in the periphery. Staff were meant to be like the air conditioning, essential but unnoticed. At 24, Elena had perfected this art. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, regulation bun that pulled at her temples, a constant, dull ache that mirrored the one in her heart. Her uniform, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, was a shroud for the person she used to be. She moved with a liquid grace that made her seem to fade into the opulent woodwork, her presence registered only by the sudden appearance of a full water glass or the quiet removal of a finished plate. She stood near a marble column, its cool surface a small comfort against her tired back, her wrist throbbing from the weight of the silver tray. Tonight was what the staff called the Oracle's Summit. In truth, it was a high-stakes audition. Konstantin Drakos was seeking a partner for a new deep-sea exploration venture. He wasn't looking for money. He had more of that than the Greek gods he so resembled in myth. He was looking for knowledge. Specifically, he was looking for someone who could interpret a single, enigmatic artifact. The prize wasn't just a contract. It was access to the Drakos shipping empire's next-generation submersible technology, a prize beyond price. Elena watched the intellectual predators circle. There was Dr. Alistair Finch from Oxford, a man whose television series on ancient naval warfare had made him a celebrity. He was pontificating loudly about the trireme, gesturing with a breadstick. Near him was Geneviève Dubois, the lead curator from the Louvre, her expression one of bored superiority. And then there was Nikos Drakos, Konstantin's nephew and the public face of the company. Nikos was everything his uncle was not, slick, modern, and oozing a corporate charm that felt manufactured in a boardroom. He wore a suit that cost more than Elena's annual salary, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "The old man is on a fool's errand," Nikos murmured to a potential investor, not bothering to lower his voice. "Chasing ghosts. We have satellite sonar, deep-sea drones. Why does he insist on deciphering this piece of junk? It's sentimentality. Bad for business." Elena felt a familiar spark of anger. She watched Dr. Finch try to impress a colleague, by quoting a line from the Odyssey in Greek. He used the modern Athenian pronunciation, flattening the vowels, stripping the ancient words of their musicality. It was the pronunciation of a tourist, not a scholar. Elena winced. Amateur. She shouldn't know that. A waitress at Ethelred's wasn't supposed to know that the dialect Finch was attempting to mimic was Ionic, but that he was missing the soft aspiration of the opening vowel. But Elena Petrova wasn't always a waitress. 5 years ago, she had been the star pupil of her grandfather, Dr. Oris Petrova, a name once whispered with reverence in the halls of academia. He was a master of ancient cartography and forgotten Mediterranean dialects. She had been his prodigy. She could read Linear B and calculate celestial navigation using charts that were 2,000 years old. Then the scandal had erupted. The accusation of academic fraud, a discovery her grandfather had made, a unique Minoan navigational tool, was declared a forgery by a rival. His reputation was shattered overnight. The university grants vanished. The lecture circuit fell silent. The shame and the stress triggered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and buried his family in a mountain of medical debt. Elena had dropped out of her PhD program at Columbia, sold her grandfather's rare books one by one, and disappeared into the anonymous, cash-rich world of New York's service industry. The stipend of a doctoral candidate couldn't pay for round-the-clock nursing care. Tips from Wall Street bankers could. So, the scholar died, and the waitress was born. More water. The voice was sharp, dismissive. Nikos Drakos held out his glass without making eye contact. Elena glided forward, her movements economical and silent, refilling it from a heavy pitcher. "He's obsessed with the Andromeda," Nikos continued, speaking to his guest. "His father's great failure. He thinks this little trinket is the key. These academics will tell him what he wants to hear. We'll get our publicity, and then I'll convince him to pivot to a more practical application of our assets." Eleanor felt the cold weight of the name, the Andromeda. It was her grandfather's obsession, too, the legendary lost ship, said to be carrying a secret that could change the world. The ship he was accused of faking evidence to find. She retreated back to her column, the ghost of her grandfather's sorrow clinging to her like a shroud. Suddenly, the ornate doors at the end of the hall swung open. The room fell silent. Konstantin Drakos entered. He was not what they expected. He wasn't a frail old man. He was in his late 60s, but possessed a vitality that seemed to suck the air from the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a weathered face. His eyes were the color of the Aegean Sea during a storm, and they missed nothing. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy suit, but he moved with the primal grace of a fisherman, not a billionaire. He didn't look like a man who sat in boardrooms. He looked like a man who wrestled with the sea itself. Trailing him were two severe-looking assistants. Drakos didn't greet anyone. He walked to the head of the table where a single, high-backed chair waited. He remained standing, his presence a silent judgment upon the assembled experts. Nikos rushed forward, his corporate smile pasted on. "Uncle, welcome. We have assembled the finest minds, as you requested." Drakos held up a hand, a gesture that was not a request, but a command. Nikos froze, his smile faltering. "I do not need the finest minds," Drakos said, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting on the seabed. His English was flawless, but carried the gravelly cadence of his native tongue. "I have hired the finest minds for 30 years. They give me data. They give me theories. They give me balance sheets." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces at the table. "Today I need understanding. I need a navigator, not a professor." He motioned to an assistant, who stepped forward and placed a velvet-lined box on the table. Dracos opened it. Inside, nestled on the dark blue velvet, was a fragment of bronze, no larger than a man's palm. It was curved, covered in intricate etchings and a handful of symbols. My father searched for the wreck of the Andromeda his entire life, Dracos began, his voice softening with a deep, resonant pain. He believed it held the original formula for Poseidon's steel, a maritime alloy lost to time, an alloy that does not corrode in salt water. This fragment was his only clue, recovered from a fisherman's net off the coast of Kassos 60 years ago. He looked at them, his eyes burning with an ancient fire. I have one test. I will speak a phrase etched upon its hidden side. It is from a dialect of the Dodecanese Islands, a tongue that has not been spoken in 2 millennia. You will not translate it. You will tell me what it means. Elena, standing 30 feet away, felt her blood run cold. She recognized the script on the fragment from the photos in her grandfather's journals, the dialect of the Sea People, a language so obscure most scholars considered it a myth. Whoever can answer, Dracos declared, their institution, their company, will be my sole partner in this venture. If no one can answer, the Andromeda will remain a ghost, and my technology will remain locked in my vaults. The tension was a physical force, pressing down on the room. 42 experts leaned forward, their professional lives hanging on the meaning of a dead language. Dracos waited, letting the silence stretch until it was taut. He leaned over the table, his powerful hands resting on the dark wood. Then he spoke. The words were strange, rhythmic, full of clicking consonants and soft, breathy vowels that sounded like the pull of the tide against a shingle beach. Hals phosphoros, alla o kyklos choreve meton arctos. The room was utterly still. In the shadows, Elena froze. The tray in her hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Her breath caught in her chest. She knew those words. Her grandfather had whispered them to her on his deathbed, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. It was the key. Dr. Alistair Finch was the first to rise, his face flushed with confidence. "Mr. Dracos," he began, his voice booming with practiced authority. A fascinating phrase. The literal translation is, "The sea is the light bringer, but the circle dances with the bear." A beautiful, poetic sentiment. Finch smiled, basking in what he assumed was his own brilliance. It is clearly a metaphorical reference to the cyclical nature of the sea and its relationship with the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, a common motif in early Hellenic navigation. It means one must trust the stars, the constants, over the ever-changing sea. Dracos looked at Finch, his expression unreadable, as if observing a curious but insignificant sea creature. That is the translation of a scholar, Dr. Finch. Any of my research assistants could have found that in a lexicon. Finch's smug smile evaporated. "But the meaning," Dracos said, his voice turning to ice, "is wrong. Sit down." A collective gasp, sharp and unified, went through the room. Finch sat, his face the color of spoiled milk. Next was Geneviève Dubois from the Louvre. She stood, her posture radiating disdain. "Constantine, you are looking for poetry where there is none. The light bringer is a reference to phosphorus, bioluminescence in the water. The circle dancing with the bear is a primitive astronomical clock. The phrase is a simple instruction. To find the fishing grounds, follow the glowing algae when the Big Dipper is at its zenith. It is a fisherman's proverb, not the key to a great mystery." Dracos let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "A fisherman's proverb? You think my ancestors, who built an empire on the sea, inscribed a fishing tip onto their most sacred instrument. You insult their intelligence, and mine. Next. One by one, they tried and failed. A German historian argued it was a coded message about trade routes. Wrong. An American tech mogul, there to consult on the data, suggested it was an algorithm for predicting tides. Wrong. Nikos, ever the pragmatist, tried to steer the conversation. Uncle, perhaps the meaning is simply lost to time. What matters is the material composition of the artifact. Our labs can analyze. Silence, Dracos commanded. His face had grown dark, a thundercloud of disappointment. This wasn't a business meeting for him. It was a vigil. These so-called experts were trampling on his father's memory, reducing a sacred quest to a set of variables. Is this it? Dracos asked, his voice low and dangerous as he stood to his full height. 42 of the world's best, and all you can offer me is dictionary definitions and foolish guesses. He turned to his assistants. The meeting is over. We are leaving. The manager of Ethelred's, a man named Mr. Dubois, looked as if he were about to faint. A multi-billion-dollar partnership was walking out of his restaurant. He frantically signaled to the staff, "Refreshments, ouzo! Everyone, please, a final toast!" Elena was shoved forward by a senior waiter. "Go," he hissed. "Offer Mr. Dracos a drink. Maybe it will calm him down." Elena didn't want to go. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew the answer. It was a fire in her throat. She walked toward the head of the table, the plush carpet feeling like quicksand. The experts were bickering, their hushed tones a symphony of bruised egos. She reached Dracos. He was standing with his back to the room, staring at a painting of a stormy sea, his shoulders rigid with fury. She held out the tray. "Sir, water?" He didn't turn. "I ask for a navigator, and they offer me water." "Sometimes," Elena whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the expensive hum of the room. "The navigator must listen to the water." Dracos went still. He turned, slowly, and his storm-tossed eyes fell upon her. He saw a waitress, a nobody, a girl in a starched apron. "What did you say?" Elena looked down at her scuffed, sensible shoes. She needed this job. Her grandfather's care facility wasn't cheap. If she spoke, she would be fired. But they were all wrong. They were defiling her grandfather's life's work. "The Kyklos," Elena said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength, still looking at the floor. "It isn't a circle, sir. In the old tongue of the sea people, it's a specific tool, a tide wheel. It doesn't dance with the bear." The room fell silent. The bickering stopped. Nikos's head snapped up. Mr. Dubois' eyes were bulging. A waitress was speaking. To the client. "Excuse me," Nikos snapped, stepping forward. "Girl, that's enough. Get back to the kitchen." "Let her speak," Dracos commanded. His gaze was locked on Elena, an expression of intense, predatory focus on his face. "Continue." Elena took a shaky breath. She switched languages, not to modern Greek, but to the strange, musical cadence of the ancient dialect, pronouncing the words exactly as her grandfather had taught her. The sounds she made were alien in the pristine dining room. "O kyklos den chorevemi ton arktos," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "It dances to the bear. The tide wheel doesn't follow the constellation. It is calibrated by it." She switched back to English, her eyes finally lifting to meet his. "The phrase isn't a metaphor, Mr. Dracos. It's a set of instructions for a navigational device. The sea is the light bringer, doesn't refer to phosphorus. Phosphoros, in this context, means the revealer. The sea reveals the way, but only if you use the tide wheel, calibrated to the lowest hanging star of Ursa Major to account for the triannual current shift in the Kossos Strait." She looked directly at him, her fear replaced by a certainty that came from a place deeper than memory. "It's not a map to a place, sir. It's a key to a specific time. You've been searching in the right location, but in the wrong season. The currents hide the wreck for most of the year. Your father wasn't wrong. He was just early." Silence. Absolute, profound silence. Dr. Finch let out a contemptuous snort. "That is the most absurd, sentimental piece of pseudo-historical—" "Quiet!" Dracos roared, the sound echoing off the crystal glasses. He did not take his eyes off Eleanor. Slowly, the hard, unforgiving lines of his face began to soften. A flicker of something that looked like hope, or perhaps pain, crossed his features. He took a step toward the waitress. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm just a waitress, sir," Elena said, her hand tightening on her tray. "No," Dracos said, shaking his head. "No waitress knows the meaning of the Kyklos. Not even my most trusted researchers understood that reference. How do you know this?" Before Elena could answer, Mr. Dubois scurried forward, grabbing her arm in a painful grip. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Dracos. This employee is clearly unstable. She will be dealt with immediately. Elena, you're fired. Get out." "Take your hands off her," Dracos said. His voice was quiet, but it held the chilling promise of utter ruin. Dubois snatched his hand back, as if he'd been burned. "She is not fired," Dracos said, his gaze sweeping over the 42 stunned experts. "She is hired." Nikos laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Uncle, you can't be serious. She's a servant. She probably overheard something in the kitchen, a lucky guess from a documentary she watched." "A guess?" Dracos turned to Nikos, his eyes narrowing. "You think that was a guess?" "It has to be," Nikos sneered, looking at Elena with undisguised contempt. "She clears dishes for a living. She doesn't understand the complexities of hydrographic surveying or metallurgical analysis." "Then let us test her," Dracos said, a dangerous light dancing in his eyes. He sat back down at the head of the table. "Bring the young lady a chair." "Sir, Elena began to panic. "Sit," Dracos said, his voice gentle for the first time. A waiter, his hands trembling, brought a chair. Elena sat, placing her serving tray on the floor beside her. She was now seated at the great mahogany table, opposite the billionaire, with the world's most brilliant minds staring at her as if she were an alien specimen. "Mr. Nikos," Dracos said, "you claim she is a fraud. Ask her a question. Any question about ancient Hellenic maritime history. If she cannot answer, I will sign an exclusive partnership with your division. You can have the technology." Nikos's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. This was his chance to humiliate the girl and seize control of the project from his sentimental old uncle. He was an academic predator, and he smelled blood. He would ask her something so esoteric, so deeply buried in the archives, that she would be exposed as the charlatan he believed her to be. "Very well," Nikos said, smoothing his silk tie. "Let's see what the little waitress knows." The opulent dining hall had morphed into an arena. The 42 experts were no longer competitors, but a unified jury, their faces a mask of derision and morbid curiosity. They needed Eleanor to fail. Her failure would reaffirm the world they understood, a world where decades of study and prestigious degrees were the only currency that mattered. If she succeeded, it would mean that their entire lives, their publications, their professorships, were worth less than the intuition of a girl who smelled of lemon polish and starch. Nikos paced before her, a modern-day prosecutor in a bespoke suit. He exuded a confident cruelty. "Let's begin with a simple matter of geography," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A warm-up, if you will." He glanced at his uncle. With your permission, of course. Drakos merely nodded, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, his expression a mask of stone. Nikos pivoted, aiming a perfectly manicured finger at her. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a first-century mariner's guide. It describes a harbour of the coiled serpent, 3 days' sail east of the port of Berenice. Modern scholars have never definitively identified it. Tell us, Waitress, where is this mythical harbour? It was a classic academic trap. The question had no single answer. It was a subject of fierce debate in obscure journals. Any answer she gave, he could refute. The other scholars smirked. They knew the game. Elena didn't hesitate. She looked not at Nikos, but at the large seascape painting on the wall, the one her interrogator's uncle had been staring at earlier. The scholars are looking in the wrong place, she said, her voice calm and even. They assume 3 days' sail is a measure of distance. It is not. The room stirred. Nikos's smirk tightened. Go on. Enlighten us. It's a measure of water, Elena continued, her confidence growing. A Roman trading vessel of that era could carry enough fresh water in its amphorae for roughly 3 days for a standard crew. The harbour of the Coiled Serpent isn't a location on a map. It's a seasonal freshwater spring that appears at the base of the Gebel Elbe Mountains, but only after the winter rains. The Coiled Serpent refers to the winding path the water carves through the dry wadi as it runs to the sea. It's not a place you find with a map. It's a place you find by knowing the seasons. The Romans weren't navigating by sight. They were navigating by survival. Nikos's mouth hung open for a second before he snapped it shut. He looked to the experts for support. Dr. Finch slowly, reluctantly, nodded. The seasonal hypothesis. It is a fringe theory, but a plausible one. It was proposed in a monograph in the 1970s that was largely dismissed. Drakos's lips twitched into what might have been a smile. 1 point to the Waitress, he rumbled. Nikos's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He abandoned geography and went for the kill. Fine. Memorizing fringe theories is one thing. Let's discuss metallurgy. He stepped closer, crowding her, his expensive cologne acrid with the scent of frustration. Poseidon's steel, the alloy you seem to know so much about, he said, spitting the words. The few historical mentions describe it as being tempered with the fire of the sea god's heart. A meaningless poetic flourish, of course. But tell us, what is the likely chemical composition of such a mythical metal? This was his turf. The Drakos Corporation had spent millions on metallurgical research. He knew the answer was that it was impossible. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, and she was no longer in a restaurant. She was in her grandfather's dusty study, the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco in the air. He was showing her a fragment of volcanic rock, dark and porous. The answer is always in the earth, Elena. His voice echoed in her memory. The stories people tell are just maps to the truth. She opened her eyes. It's not a chemical composition, she said. It's a biological one. Nikos laughed out loud. Biological? Are you insane? We're talking about steel. You are, Elena corrected him, her voice cutting through his laughter like a blade. The ancients weren't. The fire of the sea god's heart refers to geothermal vents on the seafloor, specifically the kind found in the Aegean volcanic arc. The alloy wasn't tempered in a forge. It was smelted using the extreme heat and pressure of a deep-sea hydrothermal vent. The unique properties didn't come from adding another metal. They came from bonding the iron with thermophilic bacteria that thrive in those vents. The bacteria create a microscopic protein matrix on the metal's surface that prevents oxidation. It's not rust-proof steel, it's living steel. The silence that followed was absolute. The experts stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. This was not a fringe theory from a dusty monograph. This was a revolutionary concept that bridged ancient history and modern microbiology. Dracos leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. "Living steel," he whispered, the words filled with a profound awe. He looked at Nikos, his eyes cold. "Well, is she wrong?" Nikos was sweating now, his tailored suit suddenly looking like a cage. He had no idea if she was right, but the terrifying logic in her explanation had unsettled the entire room. This is baseless speculation," he stammered. "She has no proof. It's just a story." "Then test her story," Dracos commanded. "Stop playing games, Nikos. Ask the question that matters." Nikos nodded, his eyes narrowing to slits. He was done. No more academic trivia. He would use the one thing that could not be guessed or learned from a book. He would use family. "Very well," Nikos said, his voice turning venomous. He switched to a rapid-fire, informal Greek, a dialect thick with the slang of the Athens business world, designed to confuse and exclude. "You speak of the sea, but what do you know of the men who sail it? What do you know of the families, of the blood feuds and the betrayals that stain its history?" He looked her dead in the eye. "What do you know of the Petrova scandal?" The air crackled. Elena flinched as if struck. Nikos switched back to English, ensuring the whole room understood the execution he was about to perform. "Your name is Elena Petrova, isn't it?" A slow, cruel smile spread across his face as he saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. "I thought the name was familiar. Everyone, allow me to introduce the granddaughter of the great Dr. Aris Petrova, the man who was once the most respected historical cartographer in the world." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the name hang in the air, until he was exposed as a fraud, a charlatan who forged evidence of the Andromeda to secure funding for his own glory. He was disgraced, stripped of his tenure, and died a laughingstock. Elena sat frozen in her chair, the blood draining from her face. "He was innocent," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He was set up." "That's what they always say," Nikos sneered, turning to address the room. "And what about you? You were his prodigy at Columbia, I recall. But you never finished your doctorate. Did you drop out, Elena? Or were you expelled?" He leaned in, his voice a poisonous whisper. "Expelled for continuing your grandfather's legacy of lies? For academic dishonesty?" He straightened up, addressing Dracos directly. "Uncle, this woman is not just a waitress. She is the legacy of a known fraud. Her knowledge, what little she has, is poisoned by the same ambition and deceit that destroyed her grandfather. You cannot build the future of our company on a foundation of lies. Her entire family is a disgrace." The room was a tomb. Dracos's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on Elena. The flicker of hope was gone, replaced by the cold, hard calculus of a man who had survived decades of betrayal. "Is this true?" Dracos asked, his voice flat. "Is your grandfather Aris Petrova?" Elena stood up, her chair scraping against the marble floor. She felt impossibly small, a lone ship in a sea of hostile faces. She looked at Mr. Dubois, who was watching her with undisguised hatred. She looked at Nikos, who was smiling in triumph. "Yes," Elena said, her voice shaking but clear. "My grandfather was Dr. Aris Petrova, and he was the most brilliant, honorable man I have ever known. He taught me that the sea doesn't keep secrets. It just waits for the right person to ask the right questions." She turned to face Dracos, her chin held high. He didn't forge anything. He found something real. He was ruined by men who wanted what he found, men who were afraid of the truth he was about to uncover? She took a ragged breath, fighting back tears. And I am a waitress, because I spent every last dollar of my inheritance, of my tuition money, trying to keep him alive after they broke his heart and his mind. I did not leave my program because of fraud. I left because I chose my family over a piece of paper. She looked directly into Konstantina Drakos's stormy eyes. I am not a liar. I am all that is left of his legacy. Nikos clapped slowly, mockingly. A beautiful speech. Truly touching. But uncle, we are discussing a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Are you going to trust the desperate ramblings of a disgraced family, or are you going to trust your own blood, your own company? Drakos looked from Nikos to Elena. He looked at her worn-out shoes and her defiant, tear-streaked face. Then his gaze drifted to the tray of empty glasses she had left on the floor. Nikos, Drakos said quietly, you mentioned the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Yes, uncle, a trivial question to expose her. You did not know the answer, Drakos stated, not as a question, but as a fact. It is an irrelevant detail, Nikos sputtered. Details, Drakos said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, are the reefs that sink empires. A misread chart, a misjudged current, a single misplaced word. You see a waitress, you see a fraud. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. He placed it on the table. It was her grandfather's. Elena gasped. I see the daughter of the only man my father ever trusted, Drakos said, his voice resonating with old grief. He opened the journal. My father, Andreas Drakos, and Aris Petrova were friends. They searched for the Andromeda together before I was born. When Aris was disgraced, my father was the only one who believed him. He knew Aris was set up by our rivals at Helios Maritime, the same rivals who are secretly funding your division, Nikos. Nikos's face went ashen. The trap he had laid for Elena had just snapped shut on him. My father died before he could prove Aris's innocence, Drakos continued, his voice thick with emotion. He made me promise to finish his work, to restore his friend's name. He looked at Elena, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful respect. For 30 years I have been searching, not just for a ship. I have been searching for a key, your grandfather's knowledge. I knew it would have been passed down. This entire summit, it was not a test for them. He swept a hand towards the stunned experts. It was a lure. For you. He snapped the journal shut. The sound was like a judge's gavel. You call her family a disgrace, Drakos said to his nephew, his voice now pure steel. I say her family is the only one in this room I can trust. He turned to Elena. Miss Petrova, take off that apron. Elena stared at him, uncomprehending. Sir? Take it off, he commanded, his voice softer now. Your time in service is over. With trembling fingers, Elena untied the crisp white apron. As she pulled it off and let it fall to the floor, it felt as though a physical weight, one she had carried for 5 long years, had been lifted from her shoulders. Mr. Dubois, Drakos said, not looking at the terrified manager. Yes, Mr. Drakos. You will prepare your finest suite, the presidential suite, for Miss Petrova. The presidential suite? Dubois stammered. But that is $30,000 a night. It is for royalty. She is my guest, Drakos said simply. And you will have my lawyers draft a contract, not for employment, for a full partnership. She will lead this expedition. He turned to the rest of the room. As for the rest of you, he said, his voice dropping to the temperature of the deep ocean, you may send me your invoices, and then get out. Uncle, you can't, Nikos cried, his composure shattering. This is madness. You're betting our entire future on a ghost story from a waitress." "The only ghost in this room, Nikos," Dracos said, signaling his security team forward, "is your future with this company. Remove him." As the guards escorted a screaming, threatening Nikos from the room, and the 42 humbled experts shuffled out in stunned silence, Elena was left alone in the vast, quiet hall with Konstantina Dracos. The silence was no longer heavy with tension. It was filled with possibility. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Dracos said, his expression turning grave. He tapped the journal. "Your grandfather found more than just the location of the Andromeda. He found out why it was sunk." Elena frowned. "What do you mean? I thought it was a storm." "It was no storm," Dracos said, his voice low. "It was sabotaged. The ship wasn't just carrying the formula for the alloy. It was carrying proof of a conspiracy that goes back centuries. The same families, the same powers that tried to steal the secret then are the ones who destroyed your grandfather to keep it buried. The ones who run Helios Maritime." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "They know I am close. They put Nikos in my company to stop me. Now that they know about you, they will stop at nothing to silence you." He opened the journal to a page marked with a dried wildflower. It was a complex diagram of constellations, but overlaid with tidal patterns and strange geometric symbols. It was a language only 2 people on Earth could now read. "Your grandfather left a final map," Dracos said. "A map not just of the sea, but of time. He called it the Chronos Key. We leave tonight. We are not just going on an expedition, Miss Petrova. We are going to war." Elena looked from the journal to the powerful, lonely man before her. She looked at her own hands, calloused from carrying trays and scrubbing counters. For 5 years, she had been invisible, a ghost in her own life. Now she was being offered a chance to reclaim not just her family's name, but her own soul. She took a deep breath, the air no longer tasting of ambition, but of salt and freedom. "I'm ready." The Gulfstream G650 was a silver dart cleaving the stratosphere, leaving the glittering cage of New York City far behind. Inside the whisper-quiet cabin, the scent of rich leather and aged wood replaced the restaurant's aroma of lamb and fear. Elena Petrova sat across a polished mahogany table from Konstantin Dracos, her grandfather's journal open between them. She was no longer in a waitress's uniform. At Dracos's insistence, she now wore a practical outfit of a linen shirt, cargo pants, and sturdy boots, procured in a whirlwind stop at a high-end outfitter. She looked like the scholar she was always meant to be, but the transformation felt skin-deep. Inside, she was a maelstrom of anxiety and exhilaration. "Drink," Dracos said, his voice a low rumble. He pushed a cup of dark, fragrant tea toward her. "You have been staring at that page for 2 hours. The ink will not rearrange itself." Elena blinked, pulling her focus from the intricate lines and faded script. "The ink doesn't have to," she murmured, tracing a celestial diagram with her fingertip. "Grandfather designed it to be read in layers. It's not one map, it's 3, superimposed. He always said a true navigator reads the stars, the sea, and the ship as one entity." "Explain," Dracos commanded, leaning forward, his intense gaze missing nothing. "The first layer is astronomical," Elena began, her voice gaining confidence as she stepped onto the familiar ground of her grandfather's work. "It's a star chart, but not of the night sky as we see it. It's a chart of stellar parallax, showing how the positions of key stars would have shifted from the perspective of a ship moving through the Aegean 2,000 years ago. It's a map of movement." "The second layer," she continued, pointing to a series of wavy lines beneath the star chart, is hydrographic. These aren't just currents. They're records of deep-sea thermal vents, the fire of the sea god's heart. He must have cross-referenced ancient mariners' logs with volcanic charts. He's mapped the heat signature of the seabed. And the third? Dracos pressed. Elena hesitated, her finger hovering over a set of nearly invisible symbols etched into the vellum. The third layer is the key. It's written in the dialect of the sea people. It's not a map of space or temperature. It's a map of time. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with the dawning of a profound understanding. The phrase on the artifact, the instructions. It doesn't just tell us to sail during a specific season. It tells us to be at a precise location when a specific set of conditions align. A high tide, during a new moon, when the heat from a particular thermal vent creates a unique magnetic anomaly. It's a single moment when the sea opens. Draco sat back, a slow, deep breath escaping his lips. "The Chronos key," he whispered. "My father spoke of it, but thought it was a metaphor. Aris found a literal key." He looked at Elena, his respect deepening. "So, the Andromeda is not just hidden by water, it's hidden by time." "Exactly," Elena affirmed. "Helios Maritime. Your rivals, they have the money, the sonar, the submersibles. They can scan every inch of the seabed. But they're looking for a thing. Grandfather knew the Andromeda isn't a thing to be found. It's an event to be witnessed." A satellite phone on the table buzzed. One of Dracos's assistants answered, listened intently, and then looked at his boss, his face grim. "Sir, it's Captain Maris on the Proteus. A Helios maritime research vessel, the Titan, has just left port in Piraeus. Its course is set for the Kassos Strait." Dracos's jaw tightened. "Nikos," he growled. He didn't know the meaning, but he knew the general location. He sent them to carpet search the area. They're trying to find it with brute force. "They won't find it," Elena said, a new steely resolve in her voice. "Not without the key. But we have to get there before the next alignment." "When is it?" Elena consulted the journal, her fingers flying across the complex charts, her brow furrowed. "Soon, frighteningly soon. 48 hours. "Pilot," Dracos commanded into the cabin intercom. "Change our destination. We are no longer flying to Athens. Take us to the private airfield on Carpathos, and contact the Proteus. Tell Captain Maris to make all speed for the rendezvous. The hunt has begun." 2 days later, the world had shrunk to the steel confines of the research vessel. Proteus. It was not a luxury yacht, but a working ship, smelling of diesel, salt, and ozone. Elena stood on the bridge beside a grizzled, bear-like man named Captain Maris, who had watched her with deep suspicion since she'd come aboard. To him and his crew, she was a land creature, a curiosity brought aboard by the boss, not to be trusted with the serious business of the sea. The Aegean was a churning cauldron of gunmetal grey under a bruised sky. A storm was brewing, the wind whipping Elena's hair across her face. On the horizon, a stark blip on the radar screen confirmed their fears. The Titan, the Helios vessel, was patrolling the strait like a shark. "They're running a side-scan sonar grid," Maris grunted, his eyes fixed on the display. "Amateurs. Like trying to find a specific needle in a continent of haystacks." "They don't need to find the needle," Dracos said, joining them on the bridge. "They just need to keep us from finding it. Their goal is to delay us until the temporal window closes." He turned to Elena. "Are you certain of the coordinates?" "I'm certain of the method to find them," Elena corrected gently. She pointed to the data streaming onto a monitor from the ship's magnetometer. "We need to find the intersection, the parallax shift in the star canopus, combined with the magnetic signature of the vent my grandfather called Hephaestus's scar. For hours they crisscrossed the choppy waters, the Proteus pitching and rolling. Elena, despite the churning in her stomach, felt strangely at home. The complex data streams were a language she understood. She directed Maris, calling out course corrections based on the subtle fluctuations in the magnetic field, her voice steady and clear. The crew's initial skepticism slowly began to melt away, replaced by a grudging respect. This girl, this waitress, she could read the deep. "There!" she suddenly cried out, pointing at the screen where a jagged red line spiked violently. "That's the anomaly. Hephaestus's scar. That's our vent." "Hold position!" Maris roared into the ship's comms. "The alignment window opens in 20 minutes, Elena said, her heart pounding. "At the new moon's tidal zenith. We have to be ready." Dracos nodded to the submersible team. "Prepare the Argo for descent." Just then, the radio crackled to life. It was a smooth, confident voice, laced with malice. "Proteus, this is the vessel, Titan. You are operating in a restricted survey area under exclusive contract with the Greek government. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." It was Nikos. "He's bluffing," Maris spat. "He has no authority here." "He doesn't need authority," Dracos said grimly. "He needs a pretext." As if on cue, a new alert blared on the bridge. "Sir," a young officer shouted, "they've deployed a drone, a military-grade underwater drone. It's heading straight for the anomaly, and for our submersible's launch bay." "It's a blockader," Elena realized with horror. "He's going to park it right over the site. We won't be able to launch." Panic began to bubble on the bridge. The 20-minute window was shrinking. "Fire on it!" a crew member yelled. "We can't," Maris countered. "If we fire the first shot, Nikos will have his incident. The Coast Guard will impound both ships, and the site will be locked down for years." They were trapped. Nikos had outmaneuvered them, using corporate law and military hardware as his weapons. Konstantin Dracos, for the first time, looked defeated, the weight of his father's promise crushing him. Elena stared at the screens, at the drone's relentless path, at the ticking clock. Her mind raced, sifting through every detail in her grandfather's journal, every lesson he had ever taught her. "The answer is always in the earth, Elena. The stories people tell are just maps to the truth. A story, a myth, the coiled serpent, the harbor that wasn't a place, but a time." "Captain Maris," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The hydrographic charts for this strait. Does it show any geological peculiarities? Subterranean caves? Tunnels?" Maris looked at her, confused. "There's a network of limestone caves, yes, unstable. We avoid them." "Why?" "Because we're not going over the drone," Elena said, a wild, brilliant idea taking shape. "We're going under it." She turned to Dracos. "Sir, my grandfather wrote about a local legend, the Breath of Poseidon, a massive underwater cave system that floods and drains with the tide. He believed it was connected to the thermal vent." "It's a myth, girl," Maris scoffed. "A story for tourists." "No," Elena insisted, her eyes blazing. "It's a map. The breath is the tidal surge. The vent, Hephaestus's scar, acts like a chimney. When the tide comes in, it pushes a superheated jet of water through a secondary opening, a back door." Dracos stared at her, understanding dawning on his face. "You want to take the submersible through an uncharted, unstable cave system." "Nikos is playing chess," Elena said, her voice ringing with a conviction that silenced all doubt. "He's expecting us to play by his rules. My grandfather taught me that the sea has no rules. We have 10 minutes. It's our only shot." Konstantin Dracos looked at the desperate faces of his crew. He looked at the implacable red dot of the enemy drone on his screen. Then he looked at the young woman before him, her eyes shining with the fierce intelligence of her grandfather. He was betting his entire legacy, his family's honor, on the ghost story of a waitress. He smiled. It was the first genuine smile Elena had ever seen from him. "Captain Maris," Dracos commanded, his voice booming with renewed power. "Give Miss Petrova the helm. Take us into the Serpent's Mouth." The descent in the submersible Argo was a journey into a black, crushing void. Eleanor sat at the primary navigation console, her hands flying over controls she had learned only hours before. Dracos sat beside her, a silent, reassuring presence. Through the thick acrylic viewport, the ship's powerful lights cut a swath through the darkness, illuminating a world of strange, ghostly rock formations. Following the faint thermal readings on her screen, Elena guided the Argo away from the main vent and toward a sheer underwater cliff face. "The entrance should be here," she murmured, more to herself than to Dracos. "Hidden by a kelp forest." They found it. A dark fissure, barely wider than the submersible itself, veiled by swaying ribbons of kelp. It was exactly as her grandfather's notes had described. "Taking us in," Elena said, her voice tight. The journey through the tunnel was terrifying. Jagged limestone teeth scraped against their hull. The currents were unpredictable, tugging them toward unseen walls. It was like flying a helicopter through a collapsing cathedral in a hurricane. But Eleanor was focused, her mind a perfect synthesis of ancient knowledge and modern technology. She wasn't just piloting. She was communing with the sea, anticipating its moods, reading its secrets in the swirling sediment and subtle temperature shifts. Finally, the narrow tunnel opened into a vast, cathedral-like cavern. And there, in the center, bathed in the eerie blue glow of the thermal vent below, was the Andromeda. It was perfectly preserved, its strange, dark hull showing no sign of corrosion. It rested on a sandy ledge, not a wreck, but a tomb waiting to be opened. "We found it," Dracos breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Father, we found it." But their triumph was short-lived. A proximity alert shrieked through the cabin. On their sonar, a new contact appeared, entering the cavern from the main opening above. It was Nikos's drone, but it wasn't alone. It was escorting a larger submersible, the Titan's own vessel. "He followed our thermal trail," Dracos cursed. Nikos's voice, tinny and distorted, crackled over the comms. "Impressive, Uncle. Truly. I never thought you had it in you. Or rather, in her." The Titan sub positioned itself between them and the cavern's exit. "Now be a good boy and transfer the ship's log and any material samples. Then you can watch as I claim salvage rights to your precious family heirloom." The Titan sub extended a powerful robotic arm, its claw snapping menacingly. They were cornered. Elena looked at the wreck, then at the threatening submersible. Her eyes fell upon the thermal vent directly beneath the Andromeda, the breath of Poseidon. The tide was at its zenith. The pressure in the vent would be at its peak. "Mr. Dracos," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "My grandfather believed the sea people didn't just use the vents for smelting. They used them as a weapon." She pointed to a series of large, eroded pillars supporting the cavern's roof directly above Nikos's position. "The heat from the vent has made that limestone brittle. If we could just increase the pressure." Dracos's eyes widened as he understood her insane, brilliant plan. He looked at the controls for the Argo's own robotic arm, currently equipped with a geological drill. "It's too risky," he said. "We could bring the whole cavern down on top of us." "Nikos thinks he's a shark in a fish bowl," Elena said, her hands already moving across the console, positioning the drill. He's about to find out he's trapped in a pressure cooker. She didn't wait for his approval. She fired the drill directly into the crust of the thermal vent. The high-pressure jet of superheated water, now destabilized, erupted with the force of a volcano. It shot upwards, a pillar of steam and fury, striking the brittle ceiling. The cavern shuddered. Massive limestone pillars, weakened by millennia of heat, began to crack and groan. Nikos screamed over the comms, a sound of pure panic, as tons of rock began to fall around his submersible. He had set a trap, and Eleanor had brought the whole mountain down on top of it. "Now!" Elena yelled, firing the Argo's thrusters, hurtling them not towards the blocked exit, but deeper into the wreck itself, using the ancient ship's non-corroding hull as a shield. The cavern collapsed in a deafening roar of grinding rock and boiling water, burying the Titan sub, Nikos, and his greed forever under the sea. Silence returned, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal and the hiss of their life support. They were alive, trapped, but alive. 6 months later, the main hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was filled not with experts, but with journalists, dignitaries, and the humbled board of Helios Maritime. On a stage, under the soft glow of spotlights, stood a new exhibit. The Treasure of the Andromeda. In the center was the ship's log, its pages perfectly preserved, and a single, gleaming ingot of Poseidon's steel. Elena Petrova, dressed in a simple, elegant blue dress the color of the Aegean, stood at the podium. She wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a corporate executive. She was the director of the newly established Petrova Drakos Foundation for Maritime Archaeology. For centuries, the story of the Andromeda was considered a myth, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the hall. Today we know it is history. The ship's log has proven that the alloy was real and that its secrets were sabotaged by a rival trading guild, the direct corporate ancestor of Helios Maritime. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. The Helios executives paled. The log also contained a full confession from the saboteur, Elena continued, which posthumously and completely exonerates my grandfather, Dr. Aris Petrova, of all charges of fraud. She gestured to a newly unveiled portrait hanging on the wall, a painting of her grandfather, his eyes twinkling with intelligence and kindness. His legacy is not one of shame, but of unwavering dedication to the truth. She paused, looking out at the crowd. The Foundation will not be selling this technology. Instead, we will be using it, as its creators intended, for peaceful exploration. And we will be funding scholarships for any student, in any field, who has ever been told that their ideas are impossible, that their family name is a liability, or that their place is in the kitchen. Later that evening, after the cameras were gone, Eleanor stood alone before her grandfather's portrait. Konstantin Drakos came and stood beside her. "He would be proud of you," Drakos said, his voice soft. "He would have loved the chase," Elena replied, a small smile on her lips. "The chase is not over," Drakos said. The ship's log contained more than just the formula. It described other artifacts, other secrets. The Kronos key didn't just unlock one wreck. Elena looked at him, her eyes sparkling with the old fire. It unlocked a whole new map. Drakos smiled. "I have a ship, and I seem to have found my navigator." Elena Vance didn't just answer a question. She answered a call from across the centuries, a whisper from the deep that had been waiting for someone with the courage to listen. She proved that a legacy is not something you inherit, but something you build, often from the ruins of the past. She had been a waitress, serving the powerful. Now she was a navigator, charting a new course for the future, proving that the most valuable treasures are not made of gold, but of knowledge, honor, and the unbreakable courage to sail against the tide.